They'll charge George Zimmerman with a hate crime.
We have opened an investigation into this matter. The department will continue to act in a manner that is consistent with the facts and the law.
To prove a federal hate crime, the government would have to show George Zimmerman intended to shoot Trayvon Martin and was motivated by racial hostility. Legal experts say that's a very tough case to make.
A federal civil rights case would be difficult because it would again require the government to prove that George Zimmerman had a bad intent. This case, racist intent. And one jury has already rejected that claim. It's hard to argue that another jury would see it differently.
This puts President Obama in a delicate position.
You know, if I had a son, he'd look like Trayvon.
That was more than a year ago. Since the verdict, the nation's first black president has yet to address this issue on camera. Instead, in a written statement, he called Martin's death a tragedy for America. But he also called for calm and said, "We are a nation of laws and a jury has spoken." But the president's team knows that won't be enough. By mid-Monday, there were more than 500,000 signatures on an NAACP petition demanding a federal case, and more than 15,000 signatures on a similar petition to the White House. Does the president feel some pressure on his administration to bring a case against Zimmerman?
Cases are brought on the merits, and the merits are evaluated by the professionals at the Department of Justice.
That means all eyes are on Attorney General Holder, a man not always known for his politic choice of words. Monday, he seemed to offer a window into his own views on the case, questioning Zimmerman's self-defense argument.
The tragic, unnecessary shooting death of Trayvon Martin.
You heard him there, Wolf, call it an unnecessary shooting death. Now, Wolf, sources tell us that the Department of Justice is still reviewing the trial evidence to decide if there is a case for racial hostility, to make this case that the shooting was based on racial hostility. As you know, justice officials will not bring the case unless they believe that they can win such a case. Now, I would expect that you could hear the president address the broader issue of Trayvon Martin's death when he answers reporters' questions in interviews later this week, Wolf.
As the Justice Department, Jessica, I don't know if you know the answer to this, clarified what Eric Holder, the Attorney General, said when he said this was an unnecessary shooting death. Do we know if they've explained what he meant by that?
They have not officially put out any word on that, Wolf, but I can tell you that I have been led to believe that we should not read too much into those words. We should not interpret that to indicate which way the Justice Department will go on the larger decision about whether there is a hate crimes case here or not, Wolf.
All right, Jessica, thank you. Jessica Yellen over at the White House. Let's bring in our chief political analyst, Gloria Borger, to further assess what's going on right now. How much of this decision eventually by the Attorney General and the Justice Department, let's say the Obama administration, will be political?
You know, Wolf, if this were a political decision, I think it probably would have been made already. It would be an easy political decision for President Obama and for Eric Holder to pursue civil rights charges against Zimmerman, but it is not a political decision. This is a legal decision, and as Jessica and Jeff Toobin pointed out in the piece earlier, this bar is very, very high. You have to prove that Zimmerman acted with deliberate intent, that he was racist, and that was not the case that was proven in this particular trial. And the Justice Department is not in the business of raising cases or trying cases with our taxpayer money that it believes it cannot win.
Yeah, and if they were to try a case like that and lose, who knows what the reaction would be then.
Exactly.
So they're better off not even doing it if they don't think they can win. They should only do it if they're sure they could win. So what are you hearing? I know you're working your sources behind the scenes over at the Justice Department. What's going through the minds of top officials over there?
In talking to some legal sources, I can tell you that there's a sense in the department that there is no need, at least right now, to move quickly on this. They're looking, for example, to see whether there's going to be some kind of a civil lawsuit. If there's a civil lawsuit, I think there's some sense they'd like to see that play out. Also, I think they need to have a debrief with the prosecution to find out what evidence was not used in trial, that it's something they might consider if they were to bring a case. So I think at this point right now, there are people in the Justice Department saying, okay, take a deep breath, do our due diligence, talk to the prosecutors, let's see what happens on the civil side, and then let's make a decision.
Yeah, I think based on everything I've heard, they want everybody to calm down, and that taking a deep breath is very important. They're relieved, at least so far, there hasn't really been much violence or anything like that. Should the president speak out to the American public on this issue anytime soon?
I think he has no choice. I think at some point he's going to be asked a question directly about it, and he's going to have to answer it. I think the problem they've got inside the White House is that whenever the president speaks about race, Wolf, the conversation becomes about him and not about the issue. And so I think that's what the president is juggling right now. He's got to be the leader of the country. He's got to lower the decibel level. But he doesn't want this to be a conversation about how President Obama reacted to the Trayvon Martin, George Zimmerman verdict. He wants the nation to have a conversation about race, not him.
Gloria Borger, as usual, thank you.
Sure.
We certainly haven't heard a whole lot from Trayvon Martin's parents in the aftermath of Saturday night's verdict, but let's get some perspective now on how the family is dealing with this. The Trayvon Martin family attorney, Daryl Parks, is joining us right now. Daryl, thanks very much for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
A general question about the Attorney General of the United States. Do you have confidence in him that he will do the right thing?
I have every confidence that the Attorney General will use the resources of the federal government to look into this matter. I happen to be part of the meeting when the Justice Department had their first meeting with the family, and we were able to see the resources that the federal government has used to investigate this case. So I know that they have gotten the information initially. Now we're at a point where they can now analyze the evidence that came into the trial to make their decision. I think it's important, Wolf, that the difference now, though, is that we now have evidence from the state criminal case where we've seen that on all of the previous calls that George Zimmerman made to the police department all involved black people. Most importantly, though, in this case, one of the main reasons he suspected Trayvon may have been doing something back was because he was black, so black being the common denominator. Now, we've always said that the race is an undertone in this case, but however, the evidence now is a little bit stronger and better in this case for the Justice Department to consider.
Why didn't the
That's the difference now.
Why didn't the state prosecutors bring those issues into this? They didn't talk about race. At one point they mentioned profiling, but it wasn't necessarily racial profiling. Why didn't the prosecutors raise those issues in this case?
Well, I think it was right. Again, first of all, as you started your piece off, we don't like to talk about race. So it was logically and strategic that they not do it and that they use criminal profiling because he was criminally profiled. He had developed a profile that the people who were doing the robberies were all black and all looked a certain way. So black being the common denominator here. So they were totally correct not to make race the issue, but to make criminal profiling the issue.
Yeah, they didn't bring in race at all in the course of those 3 weeks of testimony. What do you want to hear from the President of the United States? What is the family? Let me rephrase it. The Trayvon Martin family, the mom and the dad, the brother, what do they want to hear from the president?
Well, I think the president's statement that he made in writing is totally appropriate. The president should not chime into this conversation while it's clearly a Justice Department issue. We don't want to make this political. The Justice Department is the legal arm of the federal government, and they have standards that they must fly. They must apply the legal standard and the factual evidence to come to their determination as to whether they can put together a case that they can win. We have every belief and hope that they will base this case from the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department in Washington to make their decision. Obviously, they will be consulting with the U.S. Attorney for the Middle District of Florida, but the decision in terms of whether the civil rights violation, we believe, should come from the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice in Washington.
Tell us how the parents, the mom and the dad, Tracy Martin, Sabrina Fulton, how are they coping? How are they dealing with this not guilty verdict?
Well, obviously, they were devastated by the verdict on Saturday night. Although they weren't in the courtroom, we notified them right then. I was so surprised because I typed in my device guilty on manslaughter. I was about to hit the button, and lo and behold, they said not guilty. And I said, wow. It was devastating. And so they've gathered themselves. They're very strong people. They have very good fortitude as people, and they are strong, and they have strong family support. So they are preparing to move forward. They're preparing to move forward with the Trayvon Martin Foundation, preparing to move forward in their advocacy work around the country, and they're going to continue to argue against violence against youth. And so this issue is bigger than George Zimmerman. George Zimmerman just happened to be the person that took Trayvon Martin's life. But what we have now is Trayvon Martin's legacy is causing this country to have a conversation that it normally doesn't have. That's a plus for all of the country.
Will they file a wrongful death civil lawsuit against George Zimmerman?
Well, obviously they have that right, but right now, Wolf, the big issue is the whole the jury's verdict that came down. And so it's too fresh to make that type of decision. They're not some money-hungry people trying to profit off of their son's death. That's not the type of people that they are. These are very good, hard-working people who live down in the South Florida, Miami area. And so they'll make that decision at the appropriate time. Right now, though, they believe that their son's legacy has been dealt an injustice, and they are happy and encouraged by the fact that so many other people feel that this is an injustice and that our government should answer in some way.
You think we'll be seeing them anytime soon, doing interviews, anything along those lines, or making a statement, doing an availability with the news media?
Well, you know, it's funny. Ben and I talked about that today in our lunch meeting regarding some of the issues going on here, and we're going to talk with them. But this is a highly emotional, sensitive, very personal for our clients. And so unlike they've had their moments, even in the past, as we've built up to the trial, where it's been difficult for them to go on, where we've had to try and talk with them. Now that we've had this very deafening event on Saturday, they have to gather themselves. So they'll gather themselves, and then at the appropriate time, whenever they are ready, they will make a statement.
Daryl Parks, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Wolf.
Daryl Parks is the attorney for the Trayvon Martin family. When we come back, the chilling one-word description prosecutors used in this case, using to describe George Zimmerman, the interview with CNN sister network HLN. That's coming up next. Plus, the daughter of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is weighing in what she says her father would think of the verdict if he were still alive today.
Versus George Zimmerman verdict.